It began on an ordinary day, the kind of day people never realize will change history. The sun rose over a calm blue sky. Cities buzzed as usual, and life went on in its quiet rhythm. No one imagined that somewhere beyond the stars, something was watching. For years, humanity had explored deeper into space, sending probes, building colonies, and dreaming of peace among the stars. People believed that progress meant safety, that the more they learned, the less they had to fear. But that illusion broke without warning. One morning, signals from the outer colonies stopped coming. At first, the scientists thought it was a glitch in the network. Then, hours later, they detected a massive surge of energy from the same direction. And after that, silence. No calls for help. No survivors. Only empty frequencies echoing through the void. Within hours, news spread across Earth. Every major channel reported the same thing. Communication with 3 distant outposts had been lost, and no one knew why. Families waited for messages from their loved ones who worked in those colonies, but none arrived. Space agencies tried to reassure the public, saying it might just be a technical issue. But deep down, everyone felt it, the kind of fear that makes your chest tighten and your mind imagine the worst. Then came the images. A cargo drone, half damaged, drifted into Mars orbit. It carried fragments of data before its system shut down. Engineers recovered what they could, and when they replayed the footage, the control room went silent. On the screen, they saw the reflection of burning structures, ships torn apart, and bright flashes crossing the blackness of space. No sound, just light and destruction. The footage lasted only 12 seconds, but those 12 seconds changed everything. Humanity realized they were not alone, and whoever had found them wasn't friendly. People called it the Silent Dawn, the day when peace ended without a sound. In the weeks that followed, chaos grew. Some said it was an alien force. Others thought it was sabotage between rival colonies. Governments demanded answers, but no one had any. Scientists worked day and night to trace the strange energy readings that appeared before the attacks. They found nothing solid. It was as if the attackers had vanished into the stars, leaving only ashes behind. The loss felt personal to everyone. Families who had sons and daughters working in those stations refused to believe they were gone. They gathered outside command centers, begging for information. On the streets, people carried signs asking for justice, not war. At least not yet. They wanted the truth. But as months passed and no answers came, grief turned into something else. Anger. For a while, the world stood still. No ships left orbit. The colonies closed communication. Fear hung in the air like fog. Every night, people looked up at the stars differently, not with wonder but with suspicion. It felt like being watched by something vast and unseen. The governments of Earth tried to act calm, but secret meetings were happening behind closed doors. The military wanted to prepare for war. Scientists warned that they didn't even know what they were dealing with. Politicians, as usual, argued about who should lead. But what no one realized was that something was already happening quietly, away from the news cameras. In hidden bases and deep underground labs, people had begun to plan, not out of hatred, but out of fear of being erased. Engineers who had once built exploration ships were now designing new kinds of crafts, faster, stronger, smarter. Soldiers who had once fought on Earth were training for battles beyond the atmosphere. Still, ordinary people tried to live their lives. On the surface, the world went on. Children still went to school, music still played, and shops still opened. But beneath it all was unease. Like a storm waiting beyond the horizon, people whispered in cafes about strange lights seen over the night sky, about missing cargo ships, about how the stars seemed less welcoming. Months turned into a year. Humanity had always been good at rebuilding, but this time something was different. They weren't rebuilding cities. They were rebuilding their courage. Out of sight, they were gathering strength. Then, as if to remind everyone that peace was truly gone, another attack happened. A mining fleet stationed near Jupiter vanished. The distress signal lasted less than a minute, a cry lost in static. When the data reached Earth, the signal analysis confirmed something terrifying. It wasn't a natural disaster. The energy readings matched those from the first attacks. That was the final breaking point. No one could deny it now. Humanity had an enemy, unseen but real. And for the first time in history, the world stopped arguing. Meetings that used to take months now took hours. Nations that had refused to cooperate were suddenly sharing technology, data, and resources. It was as if all the boundaries between countries dissolved overnight. Every scientist, engineer, and strategist came together under one goal: survival. The project didn't have an official name at first. People just called it the Fleet. Those who worked on it were ordinary people with extraordinary loss. Parents who had lost children in the colonies, scientists who had seen their research destroyed, pilots who had once flown rescue missions that never returned. They worked without rest. Hidden under mountains, inside lunar bases, and across deep space stations, ships began to take shape. Massive structures built from metal and determination. But it wasn't just a military project. It was a human project. For the first time, Earth was truly united. There was no us or them. There was only humanity, one species under one sky, facing the unknown together. People wrote messages inside the hulls of the ships before they launched. Messages like, "For my family, for the colonies, for peace." Children sent drawings to the engineers to hang inside the control rooms. Even the smallest things carried meaning. Humanity wasn't preparing for revenge out of hate. It was preparing because it refused to be afraid anymore. Meanwhile, in the shadows of space, the unknown enemy remained silent. No more attacks came, no signals, nothing. Some began to believe maybe the danger had passed. But those who had seen the images from the destroyed colonies knew better. Silence didn't mean peace. Silence meant waiting. As the second year ended, the first of the new ships lifted off from Earth's orbit. They weren't sleek or beautiful. They looked rough, covered in layers of armor, with engines that glowed like burning suns. But to the people watching from below, they looked like hope. Crowds gathered in every city as the news broadcasted the launch. Some cried, some saluted. Others stood in silence, feeling pride for something larger than themselves. The governments finally gave the project its name, the Fleet of Revenge. But among the workers, they preferred another name, the Promise Fleet. Because to them, it wasn't about vengeance. It was about making a promise to every soul lost in the first attack, that humanity would never stay silent again. Even as the world celebrated the launch, no one forgot the emptiness of those lost colonies. Every person who watched the ships rise felt the same thought. This could have been prevented. But regret couldn't change the past. What mattered now was the future. As the ships disappeared into the sky, the world changed. Humanity was no longer a collection of separate nations. It was one voice rising against the darkness. For the first time in history, they understood what it truly meant to stand together. Far above, among the stars, deep sensors continued to scan the void. There was still no sign of the enemy. But those who worked in the observation station said sometimes at night they saw faint lights moving far beyond the known regions. Maybe it was imagination, or maybe it was a warning. Either way, Earth didn't wait for proof anymore. It had already started to prepare for the day those lights would come closer. The silence after the chaos felt heavy. But within that silence, something powerful was growing: unity. Humans had discovered that their greatest weapon wasn't technology or power. It was their will to protect each other. No one knew when the next encounter would happen. No one knew if the enemy would ever return. But one thing had changed forever: humanity's heart. The fear that once controlled them had turned into courage. They had lost so much, but they had gained something priceless: the understanding that no matter how strong the darkness, the light of unity could still rise from it. And so, under the calm blue sky of Earth, people began to look up again. Not with fear this time, but with purpose. They knew that somewhere out there, something had started this war. But when that moment came again, humanity would be ready. They thought humanity wouldn't retaliate. They thought the silence meant surrender. But what the enemy couldn't see was that inside every human heart, the fire of hope was already burning, waiting for the day it would light the stars once more. Months turned into years, and the silence from the stars grew heavier. People wanted to believe the danger had passed, but no one could truly rest. The memories of the destroyed colonies still haunted every mind. Humanity had tasted peace for so long that war felt like a forgotten language. Yet now everyone could feel it returning in whispers, in the eyes of scientists who couldn't sleep, in the worried faces of families watching the night sky. The loss had changed everything. People who once dreamed of expansion into space now dreamed of survival. Across Earth, unity replaced rivalry. Old borders that once divided countries began to fade. Instead of fighting over land or politics, leaders began meeting under one flag, the flag of humanity. They all knew the truth. It didn't matter which nation you came from. If the next attack came, no one would be safe. Underneath the deserts, mountains, and oceans, something powerful was being built. Hidden from the public eye, humanity's greatest minds worked together in secrecy. These weren't just engineers or soldiers, they were dreamers, builders, and believers. Men and women who had lost everything but still refused to give up. They didn't talk about revenge the way others did. To them, this wasn't about payback. It was about making sure no one would ever have to experience that kind of loss again. Every corner of Earth was contributing. In the cold regions, massive reactors were built to power new starships. In orbit, construction stations surrounded Earth like a shining necklace. On the Moon, factories turned dust into metal plates for ship armor. Mars became a testing ground for weapons that didn't exist a decade ago. Humanity was moving fast, too fast for fear to stop it now. The media didn't talk about what was happening. Most people only knew bits and pieces. They saw the launches, the new satellites, and the sudden silence of the military. But behind the quiet front, a storm was building. The fleet of revenge, as it was called later, was being born in those hidden places. Designed by loss, powered by unity. It all began with a small team working in a facility buried under ice. They discovered that the strange energy used in the first attacks wasn't natural. It was an artificial pulse, a kind of wave that could disable entire communication systems. Once that was known, everything changed. Engineers realized they needed ships that could survive those waves, and scientists began developing new shields that could resist that kind of energy. People worked without rest. Many of them hadn't taken a single day off in years, but no one complained. Everyone understood what was at stake. They didn't work for medals or fame. They worked for faces they remembered, loved ones who never returned from those lost colonies. Life on Earth had changed completely. Children grew up learning about unity and survival instead of wars between nations. Schools taught new subjects: cosmic defense, deep space communication, energy field theory. Even artists and writers joined the movement, creating songs and stories that gave people hope. The world had turned its grief into purpose, yet amid all the progress, fear still lingered. The unknown enemy had not shown itself again, and that silence felt unnatural. The experts said they might be watching, waiting, studying human behavior. That thought was worse than open war. The idea that something was observing from the darkness, waiting for weakness. Every few months, strange signals appeared near the outer rim. Each time it caused panic, but the new scanning systems could never confirm what they were. Some said they were echoes from distant stars. Others whispered they were probes from whoever attacked before. But even in fear, humanity refused to stop building. In one of the lunar facilities, a small accident happened. An energy reactor overheated. For a moment, people thought it was an attack. Sirens echoed through the base. Workers rushed through tunnels trying to stop a meltdown. They managed to control it. And the next morning, the director of the project stood before the workers and said something that spread across the entire network. Every time something tries to stop us, it reminds us why we started. That line became a symbol. It appeared on banners, screens, even painted across the hulls of the first few completed ships. It wasn't anger that drove people anymore, it was strength. The fleet started taking form. Hundreds of ships, each one built from the combined effort of every continent. Some were command ships, others were carriers, and some were scouts designed to explore the deep reaches of space. The first time they tested their engines, the entire sky over Earth glowed for a moment like dawn. People came out of their homes just to see the light streak across the clouds. No one forgot that image. For a moment, the whole planet looked up together, not in fear, but in pride. But not everyone agreed with the military's direction. Some peace organizations warned that this buildup could make things worse. They said the attackers might see humanity's growing fleet as a threat and strike again. Leaders listened but stood firm. "We build not to threaten, but to protect," they said. And deep down, even the doubters knew it was true. Humanity had already been attacked once without provocation. Doing nothing would be the real danger. As months passed, small changes began to appear. Earth's economy shifted completely toward space. New jobs opened in orbital construction. Families that once lived in crowded cities now worked in clean, bright space habitats. The human race had found a new rhythm, progress born from pain. Still, the unknown lingered. Late at night, in monitoring centers across the globe, radar operators often stared at the static on their screens, wondering if they'd be the first to see the enemy return. Some secretly prayed never to witness that day. Others quietly wished for it just to end the waiting. One evening, something strange happened. A signal came from deep space, faint but structured, too precise to be random. It wasn't a human transmission. The code repeated every few minutes. It wasn't a message anyone could read, just a pattern of light and sound. For several days, scientists debated what it meant. Some thought it was a new kind of communication test. Others feared it was them, the ones who started it all. Then, without warning, the signal vanished. The world held its breath again. And when nothing happened afterward, life went back to its uneasy routine. But for those working on the fleet, it was a reminder that time was running out. By the 5th year after the Silent Dawn, humanity had built the largest fleet in history. Thousands of ships stood ready across multiple orbits, though not all were fully functional. The first official test mission was launched toward the Outer Rim to investigate the ruins of the destroyed colonies. The crew chosen for that mission carried the weight of every lost soul. They left with quiet determination, knowing they might not return. Their departure was broadcast across the world. People gathered in public squares to watch the live feed of the ships rising beyond the atmosphere. There were no cheers, only silent respect. Everyone understood this wasn't a moment of victory. It was a promise, a step toward facing the truth of what happened years ago. As those ships disappeared into the stars, an old man who had lived through both the early space age and the Silent Dawn said something that echoed across social media that night. "We used to look at the stars and see hope. Then we saw fear. Now we see both, and that's what makes us human." His words summed up what everyone felt. Humanity was no longer naive, but neither was it broken. The pain of loss had turned into purpose, and the fear of the unknown had turned into courage. Back on Earth, life continued. People learned to balance hope with readiness. Children played under the same skies, now filled with faint glows from the orbiting fleet. Farmers worked fields as transport ships passed overhead. Scientists tested new propulsion systems. Teachers told stories of the first explorers, and artists painted scenes of light overcoming darkness. Humanity was alive, not perfect, but alive in a way it had never been before. The fleet wasn't complete yet, but its spirit already lived in every person who looked up at the sky. They didn't see endless space anymore. They saw home. A fragile, shining home worth protecting. Somewhere far away, beyond the reach of even the strongest sensors, something stirred. No one knew what it was or if it even existed. But if it did, it would find a very different humanity waiting. Not the fearful, unprepared species it had attacked years ago, but a united force ready to face the unknown. They thought humanity wouldn't retaliate. They thought fear would silence them forever. But in that silence, humans had learned to build, to grow, and to wait. And soon that waiting would end. Years had passed since the first attack, yet the memory still burned in the heart of every human. The world looked different now. Skies were busier, filled with the glowing trails of ships heading to orbit. The sound of rockets had become as common as the sound of rain. Humanity had moved from fear to preparation, and from preparation to quiet determination. The great project that had begun in silence was now a living force. The fleet of revenge was no longer a dream hidden under mountain bases or lunar ice. It had taken form. In the shadow of Earth's moon, hundreds of massive ships stood anchored in space like silent guardians. Their dark metallic hulls reflected sunlight like liquid fire, Each ship carried a story, a name, a reason to exist. They were not built for conquest, but for remembrance. Every person working on those ships had a personal reason. Some had lost family in the first attacks. Others had survived the early space missions that ended in tragedy. Many were simply people who refused to stay helpless any longer. Together they had built something beyond imagination. Not just machines, but symbols of human unity. The project had been renamed quietly. Officially, it was still called Operation Dawnfire, but the people called it the Promise Fleet. The name carried hope instead of hate. Every ship carried markings of old flags, but all of them now shared one emblem, a single silver circle representing Earth, surrounded by small stars for every colony lost. That image had become sacred, like a promise written across the stars. The command centers were filled with quiet focus. Engineers monitored every signal. Scientists tested every new system, and pilots trained endlessly in simulation chambers. They practiced for scenarios no one had ever faced before. Gravitational storms, communication blackouts, and long-range travel beyond mapped space. Life inside the space stations was a world of its own. The people who lived there didn't see the sunrise or sunset anymore, only the soft glow of distant stars. Time moved differently in orbit. Days blended into weeks, but no one complained. They had a mission that gave every minute meaning. Earth itself had changed too. Cities were cleaner, industries were focused on sustainability, and resources were shared like never before. It was strange. An unseen enemy had done what centuries of diplomacy couldn't. It had united humanity completely. The threat had made them remember what really mattered: survival, cooperation, and peace. Even though it was called the Fleet of Revenge, most people didn't talk about vengeance anymore. They talked about safety, about making sure no one else had to live in fear. There was still grief, but it had softened into purpose. In the orbiting headquarters near Mars, a quiet ceremony took place every year on the day of the first attack. Hundreds gathered in a large transparent hall facing the red planet. No speeches, no applause, and only silence. They projected the names of all lost colonies on the glass, glowing faintly against the black of space. It wasn't a moment of sadness, but of strength. It reminded everyone why they were there. Still, the unknown hung over them like a shadow. Even after years of scanning, the enemy's location remained a mystery. The energy signatures from the first attacks had disappeared completely, leaving nothing to trace. Some scientists believed the attackers had gone into hiding, maybe retreating beyond known space. Others thought they might still be watching, studying humanity's response. That uncertainty was the hardest part. It wasn't the fear of being attacked again that haunted people. It was the silence, the waiting, the endless wondering about who or what was out there. But if the enemy was watching, humanity wanted them to see this, a united species that had turned its pain into progress. The first major milestone came with the activation of the flagship. It was the largest human-made vessel ever created, a floating city wrapped in steel and light. When its engines first roared to life, the vibrations could be felt all the way to the moon. People across the world watched the launch broadcast. Entire families gathered in front of screens, holding hands, whispering prayers, and cheering as the great ship rose slowly into the dark. It wasn't just a test, it was proof that humanity could rise again. That moment became a symbol of hope. Schools replayed the footage for students. Artists painted murals of it on walls, and the phrase, "When the flagship rose, humanity rose too," became part of culture. But behind all the pride, there was still tension. The leaders knew something that most civilians didn't. A new pattern had begun appearing in the deep space sensors. Faint distortions, almost invisible at the edge of the system. They didn't resemble anything human. At first it was dismissed as cosmic interference, but the readings kept returning. Every few months, the same strange pulse appeared, silent, rhythmic, deliberate. The scientists analyzed it for months. It wasn't a communication signal, at least not in any known form. Some believed it was a scanning device, testing the boundaries of human space. The thought alone was enough to unsettle everyone in command. If that was true, it meant the enemy knew humanity had rebuilt and they were measuring its strength. Still, there was no contact. No attack, no messages, just those faint pulses from the darkness. Meanwhile, the people kept building. More ships joined the fleet, and training programs expanded. Young recruits volunteered from every continent. not for fame or fortune, but for purpose. The world had changed in a way no one expected. There was a quiet pride in being human now, a kind of strength that didn't need words. In those years, humanity also learned humility. They had once believed they were alone at the top of the chain, but that illusion was gone. They knew now that the universe was full of unknowns, some peaceful, some not. That knowledge made them cautious, but it also made them wiser. Each time a new ship joined the fleet, it was celebrated quietly. The crews would stand together before launch, touching the emblem of Earth on the hull, whispering the same line, "For the ones who didn't come back." It was a ritual that gave them courage. Life on Earth grew calmer. For the first time in decades, there were no wars between nations, no political divides worth mentioning. The global network showed more cooperation than ever before. People began to understand that their real enemies were not other humans, but ignorance and division. It was as if the pain of the Silent Dawn had reshaped the soul of the species. Yet under all that calm progress, tension quietly built. Every time the strange energy pulse appeared again, the leaders gathered in emergency meetings. They never made it public, fearing panic. The scientists confirmed that the frequency was slowly changing, as if something far away was adjusting its systems, preparing for something. One night in the control room of the orbital headquarters, the pulse came again, stronger, sharper, closer. It lasted longer than before, nearly 5 minutes. For those who monitored the data, the meaning was clear. It wasn't random. It was a message, though not in words. A signal that said, "We are watching." The next morning, the fleet increased its readiness level for the first time since its creation. Every ship was put through emergency drills. Power cores were tested, defense systems checked, and communications synchronized. The air across all command centers felt heavy but focused. Humanity had waited long enough. The silence that followed felt different, like the moment before a storm. But this time, Earth wasn't afraid. The people had built something that gave them strength. They had each other. They had the fleet. Children in schools still looked up at the sky, tracing the faint lines of ships passing overhead. To them, it wasn't frightening. It was inspiring. They grew up believing in unity, not fear. They didn't remember a time when humanity was divided, only the time when it stood together. Every day, messages of hope were transmitted to the fleet from people across the world. Farmers, teachers, artists, and scientists all sent words of encouragement. They told the crew members that they were not just fighting for the lost colonies. They were protecting the entire human story. Those messages played softly in the ship's common halls like gentle background music. It reminded everyone what they were really defending. The waiting continued. Days turned into months, months into years again. The fleet remained on standby, silent and watchful. But in the stillness of space, every ship gleamed like a star of its own, a sign that humanity had risen from ashes stronger than before. No one knew when the enemy would return, or if they ever would. But everyone knew one thing with absolute certainty. If that day came, the world would not face it in fear. Humanity would rise, united with all the strength that grief, hope, and courage had built. They thought humanity would break. They thought the silence meant surrender. But in that silence, humanity had found its true voice, a voice made of unity, memory, and light. The day started like any other. Space was quiet, calm, and endless. The fleet floated in silence around Mars, its ships shining like distant lanterns. Inside the command stations, everything was routine. Systems checks, signal tests, and long hours of quiet waiting. No one expected anything unusual to happen. Yet deep down, every person knew that silence in space could change in a single heartbeat. It began as a flicker, a faint light on one of the long-range scanners. At first, the officers thought it was just another reflection from a passing asteroid, but the light didn't move like a rock. It blinked in patterns, too precise, too rhythmic. When they ran the readings through the system, the room went quiet. The pattern matched the strange pulse that had been appearing for years. Only this time it was closer. Much closer. The signal grew stronger, pulsing through the radar waves like a heartbeat. The technicians exchanged worried looks as more lights appeared on the screen. Not one, but hundreds. They were coming from deep space, heading toward the solar system. Messages were sent instantly to Earth. Within minutes, every leader, scientist, and commander was alerted. The silence that had lasted for years was over. The enemy hadn't forgotten humanity. They were coming back, Across the fleet, sirens sounded softly, not in panic but in warning. Crew members took their positions. Engineers checked engines, pilots ran diagnostics, and communication officers opened secure channels. The once silent ships came to life, glowing faintly in the darkness. The hum of engines, the rhythm of footsteps, and the low voices of calm coordination filled the halls. Back on Earth, the sky filled with distant flashes as ships began leaving orbit, one after another. The world watched again. People gathered in open areas, staring upward as streaks of light crossed the night sky. They didn't cry this time. They didn't panic. They stood together, quietly proud, watching their defenders rise. On the moon, inside the Central Command base, leaders met around a large holographic table. The images of the approaching fleet glowed in front of them. It was massive, larger than anything humanity had seen before. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, one of the senior officers broke the silence with steady words. They thought we would stay silent. They were wrong. Orders were sent to every ship. The fleet slowly began to form into battle formation, though no one called it that aloud. The official term was defensive alignment. Humanity didn't want war. They only wanted to make sure history didn't repeat itself. From the outside, it must have looked breathtaking. Hundreds of human-made ships turning in perfect unison, their engines glowing blue against the black of space. The sight itself carried a message. Humanity wasn't afraid anymore. As the enemy signals drew nearer, transmissions were sent in all known languages and frequencies. Peaceful greetings, offers to communicate, and requests for dialogue filled the airwaves, but no response came. The signals kept coming closer, fast, silent, and cold. Hours turned into days. The distance between the two forces shrank quickly. Across Earth and the colonies, people stopped their daily routines to watch live updates. It wasn't just soldiers waiting now. It was every human heart beating with the same hope and fear. The moment had come. Then one night the scanners lit up completely. The enemy fleet had entered human range. For the first time, humanity saw them clearly. Their ships were huge and unfamiliar, dark shapes surrounded by glowing energy fields. They didn't resemble anything human-made. Their design was strange, almost organic, like they were grown rather than built. No one knew what kind of creatures piloted them, and maybe that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that they had returned to finish what they started, and they were about to discover a very different humanity. Inside the main control room of the flagship, the crew waited for orders. The communication officer looked up and said quietly, "No message from them, sir. Just silence." The commander looked at the glowing dots on the screen, representing the enemy ships closing in, and replied softly, "Then we'll answer with our presence." Outside, the engines flared. The human fleet moved forward, slowly and confidently. Across the communication channels, every captain received the same message: "Stand ready." The first strike: "Hold position until provoked." That order carried weight. It wasn't fear that held them back, it was discipline. Humanity had learned that reacting too fast could destroy everything. They were not here to start another tragedy. They were here to make sure there would never be one again. For several tense minutes, the two fleets faced each other in silence. Billions watched the live feed. The distance between them could be measured in light seconds, yet it felt like two hearts facing one another across eternity. Finally, something shifted. The alien fleet sent a single pulse of light, a bright flash across the scanners. It wasn't a weapon, it was a message. The transmission came through as a deep, vibrating tone that no one could translate. It wasn't words, but it carried meaning, a kind of warning. The computers analyzed it and displayed the decoded essence on the screen. "You should have remained silent." Inside the control room, no one moved. The message echoed across all frequencies. On Earth, people watching the broadcast held their breath. Everyone knew what those words meant. It was the same arrogance that had caused the first attack. Then, the commander on the flagship leaned toward the microphone and gave a calm reply that would later become part of history. "We learned to speak louder. That was all. No threats, no anger, just quiet strength." The alien fleet shifted positions, forming patterns that looked defensive. Maybe they hadn't expected humanity to respond with such power. Maybe they thought the planet would still be scared and weak. They were wrong. The next few hours were a test of nerves. Both sides hovered in silence, scanning each other, waiting to see who would act first. For humanity, every minute felt endless. Engineers watched energy levels carefully. Pilots kept their hands on controls. And everyone whispered prayers to themselves. Then, the sensors picked up a small burst. A single alien ship breaking formation and moving toward the fleet. It wasn't clear if it was a message or a challenge. No one knew. The commander gave one order: hold position, observe. The tension was thick enough to feel like air had weight. The small alien ship came closer and closer until it stopped just at the edge of human range. It emitted another pulse, brighter and sharper this time, then turned and retreated. It was gone in seconds. But what it left behind was unmistakable. A trail of energy unlike anything seen before. It was a scan. They had been measuring humanity's strength again. That was the moment everyone understood, and this wasn't a greeting. It was preparation. The commander turned to his officers and said quietly, "They wanted to see if we were ready. Now they know we are." After that, the alien ships began to pull back one by one, fading into the distance. They didn't attack. They didn't communicate again. Within hours, the radar screens cleared. The enemy fleet had vanished into deep space, leaving behind only the faint traces of their passage. Across Earth, the relief was overwhelming. Cheers broke out in cities, tears in homes, and laughter among those who had waited years for this moment. Humanity had faced the ones who once destroyed them, and they hadn't needed to fire a single shot. Their strength, their unity, their courage had spoken louder than any weapon. But even as people celebrated, the leaders knew it wasn't over. The aliens had left, yes, but they hadn't surrendered or vanished forever. They had simply retreated, perhaps surprised by what they found. Humanity knew they would return one day. That night in the headquarters, as the fleet maintained formation around Mars, the commander stood by the observation window. The stars looked calm again, but he knew better. Still, he smiled faintly. Humanity had survived the test. They had shown the universe something important, that unity could be stronger than destruction. Back on Earth, lights burned late into the night. Children pointed at the glowing dots in the sky and whispered stories about the brave people watching over them. Parents held them close, telling them that no matter how dark the universe seemed, humans would always find a way to protect their home. The silence returned to space, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was filled with strength, the kind that comes after facing fear and refusing to bow to it. They thought humanity would stay quiet forever. They thought the fire had gone out, but they had forgotten one thing. When humans lose everything, they don't surrender, they rebuild, they rise, and they remember. The fleet of revenge drifted across the dark, glowing softly like a constellation made by human hands. It wasn't a symbol of war anymore. It was a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of space, humanity had found its voice, and that voice would never be silent again. The days after the encounter felt strangely quiet. The human fleet still floated around Mars, waiting, watching, and listening. The alien ships had left, but no one truly believed it was over. Deep down, everyone sensed it. The silence was only a pause before the next move. Inside the flagship, the crew followed their routines as usual, but there was a different kind of energy now. It wasn't fear. It was focus. Every person on board knew they were part of something much bigger than themselves. Humanity had stood its ground, and that changed everything. People were no longer running or hiding. They were preparing. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal. Cities that had once lived under the shadow of fear were alive again. Children went to school, markets were open, and laughter echoed through the streets. Yet the world was not the same as before. Something deep had shifted in human hearts. The entire planet now thought as one, not divided by borders or languages, but united by purpose. In schools, teachers spoke about the fleet as if it were a living legend. Children drew pictures of shining ships and brave people standing against the unknown. They didn't draw fear, they drew hope. The idea that humanity could defend itself had become a new kind of strength. Up in orbit, the fleet continued to train. Every pilot practiced until they knew their ship like a part of their own body. Every engineer worked to make systems stronger, faster, and smarter. Every commander drilled communication protocols because in space, 1 second of confusion could mean disaster. And while all this continued, deep space scanners picked up faint signals again. Not from the same direction as before, but from multiple points across the galaxy. It wasn't an invasion yet, but it was movement. The universe was waking up, and humanity was now part of that story. Inside the moon's command center, scientists worked tirelessly to decode the new signals. Some were patterns of energy that didn't match anything known. Others looked like messages, though they were in languages no one could understand. Each day brought a new mystery. One evening, as the sun set over Earth and rose over Mars, a strange thing happened. One of the outer defense satellites picked up a message, not from an enemy, but from another world. It wasn't hostile. It was cautious. The translation was rough, but its meaning was clear. We saw what you did. We did not think humans could stand against them. We were wrong. That single message changed everything. It proved that others had been watching. Silent civilizations spread across the stars who had seen humanity rise from its ashes. And now for the first time they were reaching out. Over the next few weeks, more messages appeared. Some were short signals, others long transmissions filled with strange symbols and sound patterns. It was as if the universe was slowly whispering, curious about the species that had refused to kneel. Humanity had gone from being a quiet, wounded world to a symbol of resistance. But with that recognition came new responsibility. The leaders of Earth met again, not to prepare for war this time, but to prepare for contact. The question was simple yet heavy. How should humanity respond? There were long discussions, debates that lasted hours. Some believed they should form alliances immediately, while others warned that not all civilizations would be friendly. The fleet commanders advised caution. Power attracts power, one of them said quietly during a meeting. Now that they know we're strong, they'll either want to join us or stop us. In the weeks that followed, Earth began sending peaceful broadcasts into space, simple messages of unity, peace, and strength. Each transmission carried the same words. We are ready to talk, not to fight. But we will never kneel again. The words echoed through the stars, and though no one knew who would hear them, it felt right. Humanity was no longer silent. They were finally speaking for themselves. Back aboard the fleet, the crew continued their long watch. They trained daily, but there was more conversation now, more laughter. They had faced death once and survived. It made them appreciate life in ways they hadn't before. Some spent hours staring out of the windows, watching the stars move slowly across the black sky, wondering how many other worlds were looking back at them. One young engineer once said, "Maybe they'll fear us now, but maybe someday they'll understand us too." Those words spread among the crew, quiet but powerful. The fleet wasn't just a weapon anymore. It had become a symbol and of endurance, of memory, of human spirit. Every time they looked at Earth glowing blue in the distance, they remembered why they were there. Every person had lost someone when the first attack happened, and that pain had built the strength they carried now. Months passed. The galaxy remained quiet, no sign of the alien fleet returning. But the humans didn't relax. They knew the enemy wouldn't simply forget. Yet something remarkable happened during that time. Instead of becoming hardened by waiting, people became more connected. The fleet began exchanging knowledge with scientists on Earth and the Moon. New technologies emerged: energy systems, faster travel engines, better communications. Humanity was advancing faster than ever. In one meeting aboard the flagship, a commander said with quiet pride, "They thought destruction would weaken us, but it made us unstoppable." That phrase spread quickly through every channel, becoming something like a promise. The fleet of revenge, once born out of pain, was now driven by purpose, not to destroy but to ensure peace through strength. Then, one day, the silence broke again. This time it wasn't an enemy signal. It was a clear message repeating over and over. The translation was simple: we are coming. Not as enemies, as witnesses. The room went still. Every officer leaned closer to the glowing display. For hours they analyzed the transmission, trying to trace its source. Finally they found it. A system far beyond known space, one no human had ever explored. The leaders debated what to do. Some warned it could be a trap. Others believed it was an opportunity to make contact with another race, perhaps one that had been hiding from the same threat. After long discussion, they decided to send a small exploration group, not to fight, but to meet. The ship that was chosen for this mission was one of the oldest in the fleet, repaired and rebuilt more times than anyone could count. It was symbolic, a reminder of humanity's resilience. A small crew volunteered, brave and curious. As they prepared to leave, the entire fleet watched in silence. The engines flared and the ship disappeared into the darkness, heading toward the unknown. For the first time, humanity wasn't running from something. They were moving forward, reaching out into the universe with hope. Days turned into weeks. The small exploration ship traveled far beyond known space, guided by the faint signal. They passed through silent regions filled with ancient ruins of long-dead civilizations. It was beautiful and haunting at the same time. Every piece of broken structure told a story, one of greatness, pride, and fall. Finally, they reached the source. It wasn't a single planet, but a cluster of them, glowing softly under a strange golden star. And there, waiting in orbit, was another fleet. But this one was different. The ships were elegant, glowing, and peaceful in design. When the human crew sent their greetings, the reply came instantly, not in words, but in emotion. Their translators struggled to explain it. The message was a feeling. We feared them too. You gave us courage. It was the first true connection. Humanity had found others who had suffered under the same threat and survived in silence. Now, because of the fleet's stand, they were no longer afraid to show themselves. Back home, when the news reached Earth, the world erupted with emotion. For the first time, humanity was not alone, and not as victims, but as equals. The message spread across every continent, across every city and colony. The sky was full of fireworks that night, though no celebration could truly capture what it meant. They had gone from being hunted to being heard. And somewhere far beyond the edge of known space, the alien race that once brought fear to humanity was watching too. They had seen the fleets unite, the alliances form, and the light of hope spread across the galaxy. Maybe they realized their mistake, or maybe they were preparing for something even greater. But this time it didn't matter. Humanity had already changed the story. The fleet of revenge wasn't just an army anymore. It had become a voice, one that echoed through space, carrying a promise that humanity would never again be silent, never again be small, and never again stand alone. The stars seemed brighter that night, and somewhere in the quiet dark, a whisper traveled across the galaxy, the whisper of a world that had found its courage again. They thought humanity wouldn't retaliate. They were wrong. The discovery of new allies changed everything for humanity. For the first time since the dark days of the first attack, people felt that they weren't alone in the universe. The message from that distant golden star system gave everyone a kind of peace they hadn't known in years. It meant others had survived, others had fought, and others believed humanity's courage had lit the way. But even with that hope, no one forgot the truth. The enemy who had started it all was still out there. The ones who thought humanity would stay silent were watching again, somewhere in the dark. Every expert agreed on one thing. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of something larger. Inside the fleet headquarters near Mars, activity never stopped. Ships came and went, patrols continued, and signals from the outer systems were studied day and night. The newly discovered allies shared technology and data, and together they built something that no one had ever seen before. A network across the stars, connected by trust and purpose. They called it the Chain of Light. It wasn't a military alliance, at least not at first. It was a promise, and that no world would stand alone again. If one was threatened, all would answer. That single idea began to spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For civilizations that had been hiding for centuries, it was a sign that they could step into the light once more. On Earth, life bloomed again. Cities that were once damaged were now fully rebuilt. The skyports were busy with travelers, scientists, and workers moving between Earth and the colonies. People were no longer afraid to look at the stars. They looked up with pride. Schools taught the story of how humanity had risen from ashes to become a voice of strength. The story wasn't about war anymore. It was about unity, courage, and hope. Yet even in peace, preparation never stopped. Deep under the lunar surface, vast factories built new ships, faster, stronger, and smarter than before. But this time they were not ships of revenge. They were ships of defense and exploration. The engineers designed them to travel farther than ever, to reach unknown corners of the galaxy, and to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Meanwhile, the small crew that had first made contact with the Golden System returned home. Their journey had been long and full of discoveries, but the most powerful thing they brought back wasn't technology. It was knowledge. They had seen the ruins of other worlds, the marks left behind by the same enemy. It was clear now. The threat was much older and much greater than anyone had imagined. The enemy had destroyed countless civilizations across time. Humanity was only the latest to stand against them, but it was also the first that refused to fall. That realization changed how people saw themselves. They were no longer a young, fragile race. They were survivors of something ancient and terrible, carrying the legacy of every world that had once stood and fallen. The chain of light wasn't just a defense plan anymore. It was a promise to those who came before. As months turned into years, the bond between humanity and the new allies grew strong. Trade began between worlds. Scientists exchanged discoveries. Students from Earth traveled to learn from alien academies, while alien scholars came to study human history. Communication systems improved and translation became easier. For the first time, there was understanding among different kinds of beings, not through fear, but through respect. Then one day, everything changed again. It started with a faint vibration in the deep space sensors, the same kind of energy pattern that had been recorded during the first attack, but stronger, more complex. It came from far beyond any known star system, from a place no one had ever explored. Within hours, the signal grew. The fleet immediately entered high alert. Across the chain of light, every member world prepared. The message spreading through the network was short but powerful. They're coming again. But this time humanity wasn't waiting to be attacked. They were ready. In the command hall on Mars, thousands of officers and representatives from different worlds gathered. Holographic maps filled the room, showing the direction of the incoming energy. The atmosphere was tense but focused. No one spoke of fear, only of preparation. A decision was made quickly. The fleet would not wait near Earth. They would move outward to meet the threat before it reached any home. It was a bold move, but it showed how much things had changed. Humanity wasn't defending anymore. They were leading. As the great ships powered up, the stars around Mars shimmered with light. The chain of light fleet assembled. Not just humans now, but ships of many worlds, each unique in shape and color, flying side by side. It was a sight that no one would ever forget. Before the launch, the commanders addressed everyone through a broadcast sent across the galaxy. The message was simple. This is not about revenge anymore. This is about peace. This is about standing together so that no one will ever be silenced again. The engines roared, and the combined fleet began its journey. From Earth, people watched as the bright trails crossed the sky once more. Some cried, some cheered, but everyone understood the meaning of that moment. Humanity had gone from a broken world to a leader of worlds. Days passed as the fleet traveled through deep space. The stars blurred into streams of light, and the silence outside the ships was endless. Yet inside, every corridor was alive with quiet determination. Pilots reviewed their systems, engineers worked tirelessly, and communication officers maintained contact with every ship. Then, they arrived. The place was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It wasn't a star system. It was a void, a region where light itself seemed to bend and vanish. The energy readings were beyond understanding. In the middle of that emptiness, they saw it, a vast structure floating in the dark, larger than any planet. It pulsed with the same energy pattern that had destroyed worlds. It wasn't just a fleet this time. It was a fortress. For a long time, no one spoke. The sight alone was enough to make hearts tremble. But fear didn't control them anymore. The commanders gave calm, steady orders. Scanners, shields, and communication systems were activated. They didn't plan to strike first. They came to understand, to give one last chance for peace. A transmission was sent, simple and clear. We don't seek war, but we will not let you destroy any more worlds. For hours there was no reply. Then the dark fortress began to glow. A deep sound like thunder in space echoed through every channel. The translation system struggled to decode it, but soon the message became clear. You learn to fight. But can you learn to forgive? That question silenced everyone. It wasn't what they expected. Forgiveness. It was something humanity had rarely been offered, and rarely given. The commander paused before answering. His voice was calm and steady as he replied, "Forgiveness begins with change. If you stop, if you turn away from destruction, then maybe one day, yes." There was another long silence. Then slowly the glowing fortress dimmed. The energy patterns shifted. What happened next would be remembered for generations. The massive structure began to break apart, not as an explosion, but as if it were dissolving into dust. The enemy ships, once symbols of terror, turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving only silence behind. No one knew if it was surrender, retreat, or something else. But it didn't matter. The war that had haunted countless civilizations for ages had ended without another drop of blood. The fleet waited for hours, scanning, confirming. When it was finally clear that the threat was gone, a wave of emotion swept across every ship. Cheers, tears, and laughter filled the air. They had done what no one thought possible, not through destruction but through courage and restraint. When they returned home, the galaxy watched in awe. The chain of light had held, and humanity had proved something to the universe, that even the smallest voices could stand against the loudest darkness. Back on Earth, celebrations lasted for days. Cities were covered in light, and people sang songs that told the story of the fleet, the courage and the unity that saved not just humanity but countless worlds. The stars looked brighter that night, as if the universe itself was at peace. Years later, children would learn about the time when Earth sent the fleet of revenge, not to destroy but to defend the light of all life. Statues were built not of heroes, but of people, ordinary men and women who believed in something greater than themselves. And in the skies above, the ships still floated quietly, a reminder that strength is not only in weapons but in will. Humanity had changed forever. They were no longer just survivors. They were guardians of the light. They thought humanity wouldn't retaliate. They never expected humanity would lead the stars.